Betty are one of the leading child agencies in the business. Set up in 2009 by Bonnie, the agency enjoys working with all parents and clients on a personal and approachable level, ensuring consistent positive feedback. Bonnie and Betty's outlook creates a close-knit and friendly feel to the agency. Hello Bonnie, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Matt. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really, really good, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on to talk to me today on this Thursday morning, taking some time out of your no doubt incredibly busy day. I think everyone always underestimates just how busy agents are 24/7. So we
Yeah.
really, really do appreciate
No,
it.
that's absolutely fine. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. So we're talking to you today about your agency, Bonnie and Betty, and I'd love to talk to you initially about your career before you founded the agency. And you set it up in 2009. What
Mhm.
motivated that decision?
Well, I had, as a child, I think I had always wanted to be an actress, and done the whole Amdram thing as a child and as a teenager. And then I actually really was interested in finding out more about agency work. So when I was in, I think it was year 10, when you do your work experience,
Hmm.
when you go and find somewhere to work for 2 weeks, I contacted a child agency, went to work there, and just absolutely loved it from day one. And so when I'd done my 2 weeks there, left there, obviously went back to school, carried on with my schooling, and then I think I was about halfway through my A levels, and just wasn't enjoying it. Contacted the agency just to see, if they kind of remembered me and if they had any vacancies available at that time, and they actually, funnily enough, did. So literally finished school, I think, the next day, went to work straight at this agency, and then just went from there. Really, I worked at a couple of others, and then decided to set up my own in 2009. Basically, just because I felt like there was a little gap in the market for kids in terms of agencies that did both modelling and acting,
Hmm.
because I think previously there was always just model agencies or just acting agencies. So there was kind of a gap there, I felt. And obviously at that time, there wasn't really a huge amount of kids agents like there is now. I mean, I get contacted daily from people saying, have you heard of this agency and have you heard of that one? And a lot of the time, we haven't heard of these agents, and it's not that they're, not reputable or anything like that. It's just that there's so many new agents, setting up on their own now, that it wasn't like that then. There was probably, I would say, maybe a maximum of like 10 kids agents that everyone kind of knew of.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was that, and then kind of not really looked back since, and just obviously grown from there.
That's really fantastic that you always had that eye on being an agent from your school days, because
Yeah,
while I know it must be wildly inaccurate, most people's image of agents are people that started out in acting or started out in some other industry and found themselves um, wanting to do the agent work then, or find
yeah.
themselves transferring, whereas you had that clear set goal initially from school, and you went about pursuing it. I love that. And you're talking about a gap in the market there as well, and
Yeah.
establishing your business. And another thing that you have is, as well as doing modelling and kids agencies, and you've got that adult division as well,
Mhm.
you've got both a southern and northern division to the agency.
Yeah.
Was this the case initially, or did that come in later on? And what was the thinking behind that?
I think that the Northern Agents side of things, I think it literally was within, I'd say, the first 2 years. So we had, obviously, the Southern Division that was our obviously agency at the time, and then I think the reason the Northern Division come about is just because we were starting to get briefs in for, obviously, kids based in the north that we were just having to turn down.
Hmm.
So obviously it got to the stage where, we just thought, look, we're getting all this work in and we're having to reject it. It just doesn't make sense, basically. So that was why we then obviously started, the Northern Division. So I think it was about 2 years in, I would say. And likewise, it's like now, for instance, we're starting to see a real need for maybe divisions in like Ireland and Scotland as well at the moment. I would say Scotland in particular for me is an area that, has suddenly, I would say, in the last sort of 2 years, we've really seen a growth in briefs coming in. And again, in the same way that we did then, we're having to turn down those briefs. But at some stage, that may be an area we look to go into as well.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah, watch this
fantastic.
space.
Do you feel like that comes from a growing shift in mindset where casting directors and production companies, theatre companies, or whatever, are looking much more for the legit real thing? So if you're
Yeah,
casting someone, a character that's Scottish, we want a Scottish actor or a Northern actor or a Southern actor rather than just a an RP speaking person that can do a half decent Edinburgh at a push.
yeah, yeah. I think that's really important. Obviously, with casting, it's all about being as realistic as possible. But I think more so than ever now, it's so important to show diversity on the screen, and that can come from anything. And I think accents in particular now, we're really starting to see a broader range. It's not just your typical 3 to 5 accents that everyone's asking for now. So
Hmm.
I definitely think that is a major factor to it. Yeah,
Yeah, and more specific within it, so it wouldn't be just Scottish. It would be,
exactly.
Edinburgh,
Yeah,
Glaswegian, Highlands, or something like that. That's really interesting.
yeah.
Bit of a broad, double-headed question next, but we like asking it anyway. Is what makes a good agent, and then what makes a good actor?
Oh, okay. What makes a good agent? I mean, with kids, I think it's really tricky because obviously with adults, you're dealing with them, and so there's no sort of in between, if you like. Whereas obviously with kids, you're dealing with the parent most of the time. So I think a lot of the time, what makes a good child actor in particular is comes a lot of the time does actually come down to their parent, in all
Hmm.
honesty. Um, and in terms of an agent, the same. I think having that ability to obviously interact both with the parent and with the child, and knowing them, I think is really important. And again, I think that's the same with your adults as well. I think being a good agent really just comes down to knowing your talent. Because obviously, when you're submitting them for work, you don't want to be submitting, particularly with children, you don't want to be submitting them for work that they're just not capable of or they're not comfortable with, because you don't want to put them in that position where they go to that audition and it completely knocks their confidence for future. So I think it's important to really know what you're putting them up for. And obviously with children, they're changing all the time, so that's quite difficult for us, I would say, and different to adults in terms of, with an adult, your adult, whereas with kids, you may know them at 6, but then they're going to be a completely different child at 8. So you're kind of having to grow with them, which is why I think it's important to. I mean, we try and do like regular workshops and things like that, so we're seeing them. And although self-taping has been more difficult and is a lot more challenging for us now in terms of kind of the amount of work involved, I do feel like that's actually helped us as well, because obviously before we weren't seeing them in the room, whereas now we're constantly seeing them through their self-tape. So we're able to kind of keep a real close eye on them. So
Mm.
yeah, I think I don't know if that answers your
No, no,
question,
it does,
but
and it's really specific, as you say, to your young actors, which is it's really because I wasn't a child actor. I was like, I was one of those typical sort of Southern boys that was like, I'm going to go to marketing or I'm going to go to law till I was about 17, and was like, no, I like to do drama. So
yeah,
it's something I never really had growing up, and it's interesting those things that you say that the client is forever changing on your books, which could
yeah,
be a good thing but could also not necessarily be a good thing. And as you say, that no matter how good a child actor is, there will be stuff that they are out of their depth if you put them up for doing, and protecting them from that kind of work, because I know agents with adult actors on their books, it's always pushing your clients to say, no, go on, give it a go,
yeah,
give it a. I mean,
yeah,
they're not going to submit you for an audition that requires you to ride a unicycle, and you can't do that unless you put it on your spotlight like a complete muppet, which I'm
yeah,
sure a lot of us have done. But
yes,
that's really interesting. So as you said, am I right in saying that you set up your agency initially to represent young actors first,
yes,
and
yeah,
then you added the adult division? So
yeah.
I'd like to ask you sort of another two-hander question, really, is what made you want to represent young actors first, and then what motivated the decision to open an adult division?
So my background had been predominantly, I would say, in kids more
Yeah.
so. So that was initially, obviously, my reasoning behind that. But then I think as soon as we obviously were established, what we were finding was we were having to let go of these amazing children, obviously, once they turned 16. And obviously, we didn't really want to let them go, and they didn't want to leave. So again, it just kind of was a natural progression, really, to kind of made sense to have the adult division so that we could kind of keep hold of them, really, more than anything else. And I guess again with the older guys, I think it worked in the same way as the North South division, in that we was getting, adult briefs that were coming in, because obviously, being known as a kids agency, a lot of the briefs that were coming in would be for families. So not only for, the brother and the sister, but also for the mum and the dad, or the aunt and the uncle,
Mm.
for a commercial, for instance. And again, those we were having to say no, we don't deal with adults. So it was rejecting those. So those two reasons really were, I think, the main reasons why we decided to obviously start taking on new adults, as well as keeping those children that were becoming young performers onto our books.
Mm.
And it's still, the adult division is much smaller than the kids, and it will always kind of stay that way, because predominantly we are a kids agency.
Yes.
But yeah, I think the journey of really not wanting to see them go once they
Yeah.
turn 16, and wanting to carry on seeing, what they're capable of, is really nice.
Well, that's really lovely, and I think every actor, young actor or adult actor, would love to have an agent that actually really does care for them and has that attachment to them in that kind of way. And I'm sure it flips on its head there, where it's not just you wanting to, not wanting to let those talented young actors go, but also the young actors who have been working with you for a while, must
Yeah,
must really
exactly.
trust you, and they don't want to get thrown
No.
off when they become 16 as well. That's
Well, a lot of the time it's all they know. They might have been
yeah,
with us for like 5 years, and also for the parents, a lot of them literally don't know where to start, because it is quite different to
of
transition from a
course.
kids agency to an adults agency. So having someone there that obviously you're familiar with and is able to guide you, I think,
Hmm.
is a massive deal for them.
And as you said a bit earlier on about, you mainly um, deal with the parents rather than the young actors,
Yeah.
and as you say, the parents might not have that experience in many areas of the industry. So I think their trust in you and their trust in allowing someone to represent their child, because there's nothing parents get more protective of than their children.
Of course. Yeah.
So of course that's very interesting. And a question I really wanted to ask you is, how do you know if a young actor is actually good enough for this industry, for want of
Mm.
a much better term that I
Yeah.
couldn't think of? Because we know that you must get bucket loads of emails from parents or guardians who think they have the next DiCaprio or the
Mm.
next famous actor in their household, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, it is tricky, because it's, yeah, difficult term to say, not good enough. It's so, like I said before, it's so hard when you're working with children, because obviously with adults you can, afford to be harsh at times, and almost sometimes with adults it's almost what they need to hear. But with children, obviously, it's a whole different ball game. But in terms of kind of, for me, like spotting a child that I think has something, I think a lot of the time it really comes down to just a natural ability that you just can't teach. We've seen children come through the door that literally their parents have said, they've just said, it's something that they'd like to do. They've never done anything like this before. They've never done any drama. So I don't know if they're good, because obviously some parents just literally don't have any idea. And you'll just know instantly, that they've got something, and it's tricky to say what that something is half of the time. But I think for children, just that natural ability, because I think a lot of the time with kids, when they are going to stage school or to drama school, is obviously they're taught in a very theatrical way,
Mm.
which often obviously isn't the way for screen acting, for instance. So you're almost having to take that away from them, and start back again from square one. Whereas a child that might not have done any training before will often come in, and there's, no preconceptions, and they just do it, and they're just amazing. So I think knowing kind of who's good enough as well. I mean, again, not only does it come down to their ability, but I think I guess their ability to be able to kind of handle rejection even at a young age as well
Yeah.
is kind of something that you have to gauge in terms of kind of putting them up for stuff as well, because I think that's important even from a young age. And I think stuff like that, a lot of the time it will come down to us having that conversation with the parent, because obviously we can't have that conversation with the child, but I think as a parent, you know deep down, as much as you might want your child to do it, you know deep down if they are the sort of child that's not going to maybe handle rejection too well at the age they're at now, and maybe to hold off and wait a little while. So I think,
Mm.
yeah, a lot of it again does come down to working with the parent as much as, finding a child that's got that ability.
Absolutely. I really hope you didn't hear any drilling during that really
No, no, I
lovely
didn't.
answer you gave, because I've
No.
had builders next door for about 8 months now, which has
Oh
been
dear.
rather painful through like basically building a whole new house next door. And I was like,
Oh
don't
no.
you dare drill today. But as you say, hopefully it's not come through. So
No, it hasn't.
anyway, in response to your answer, as you say, it's the sort of that dynamism, that's just the wrong
Mm.
word, that magnetism, or
Yeah,
the
no,
idea
I
that
know what
when
you
that
mean.
person
Yeah.
walks into a room, everyone just wants to listen to them.
Stops. Yeah.
Everyone wants to look at them. That idea that as you said, again, that sort of God-given talent, again, for want of a better term, but that
Mm.
idea that if you're looking down at your notes in a casting room and that person walks in the door or that person starts acting, everyone looks up.
Yeah.
And as you
Yeah.
say, that natural talent. And it's interesting that you say as well at school that kids are taught to be very theatrical, and it's so true, because I think the drama curriculum at school, for right and wrong, is not trying to teach kids to be actors.
Mm.
It's trying to give them that confidence, that um, throwing away inhibitions, and
Yeah.
that idea of studying drama practitioners rather than straight natural acting.
Yes.
And that some kids again will just have that ability where you're like, okay, this is a script, sit in front of a camera and you're just talking to your dad, and they go, oh, okay, and they just do the scene naturally and
Yeah.
talk. It's fantastic. It's something that I remember when I first auditioned for drama school when I was in sixth form, and got absolutely rejected by every single one, because I went in with that theatrical attitude that
I
they're
am an
just not.
actor.
Yes, yes. Please hire me. You knew I was in
Yeah.
Oliver when I was 17, and I played Fagin even though I looked about 12. But yeah, it was that kind of thing. Rather laugh me out the room, but it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. But that's really interesting. It's that thing you just can't put a finger on, and that idea as well
Yeah.
that they need to be able to handle rejection, that adults in the industry fairly as well struggle with
Exactly.
that on a daily
Yeah.
basis. So
Yeah.
to put a kid through that, as you say, you've got to be sure that it's something that will motivate them rather than put them down, because I think there's a lot of talk these days about kids are too soft or kids are too this, but whatever, there are things that you really do need to be careful and protect children from, and I think you're
Yeah.
quite right to highlight that. um in terms of seeking representation for
Mhm.
for parents with their young actors, what are your biggest do's and don'ts when they're trying to get these young actors representation?
So I mean, we only open our books normally like once, sometimes twice a year for different age groups.
Yeah.
So I would say, obviously, first of all, find out if the agency's books are open before you start kind of inundating them with photos and CVs and things like that. Because obviously, if they're not open, there's just not going to be much point in doing that. Um, if they are open, in terms of like do's, in terms of an application, I would say, first off, if you haven't got professional headshots, don't worry, and don't try and quickly go out and spend hundreds of pounds getting those done, because for kids they're just not necessary, particularly at an application stage. Obviously, when we're looking at applications, we just want to see what they look like, nice and clearly alongside their CV. So I would definitely say don't worry about going and getting headshots done if you haven't got them already. And if you have got them, but they're obviously outdated, so obviously depending on the child's age, but anything more than about a year or so out of date for a child, there's probably going to be no point sending them. We've had a lot of applications in the past where we've then brought them in to assess, and the photo is clearly like 3 years out of date, and obviously for a child it's quite a
Yeah.
lot. So
Adult actors try and do that and may or may not get away with it, but usually get called out and they say, "No, I look older with a beard." Shut up. You just
yeah,
whereas with
yeah,
kids, surely they're suddenly, 5'9" rather than
exactly.
5'1".
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, there's no point obviously using outdated headshots. Don't worry if you've got outdated headshots versus current snapshots, then snapshots all the way. Like there's no
Mm.
point. Don't worry about that. And obviously when we're looking at applications, we are receiving an awful lot at any one time. Obviously because we don't have our books open all year round. When we do open them, again we are inundated. So I think making sure that obviously we can see exactly what your child's capabilities are as kind of quickly as possible on their CV. So if they are already on Spotlight, you'll be providing a link. So again, everything will be on there, hopefully nice and clearly. But if it's not, I would say kind of try and look at Spotlight and try and lay it out in that way so we can clearly see straight off, if your child's got any credits. If they haven't, don't worry, that's absolutely fine. Just their skills, if they're capable of any other accents, just everything that they can kind of do. Really, we want to
Mm.
we want to know about it in advance. What
Languages? Are they quite
languages? Definitely, yeah. I mean, obviously, what you don't want to do is do an application, it's not successful, and then you completely forget that you forgot to put down that they are bilingual. Because, for instance, that might be something that we're really keen to look for at the moment on the books. And obviously, if that's completely missed out immediately, we're not going to see that.
Yeah.
So just make sure you're putting it all down, and keeping it kind of clear and concise. Really, I would say. Um, don'ts as well. I would say. We do get a lot of, again, going back to photos, kind of model portfolio shots where the children have got their hands under their chins, or they've got makeup on, or they've had their hair curled into ringlets. And again, that's not what we want to see. We just want to see what your child looks like as if they would turn up to a casting after school that day. We don't want to see them looking prim and proper.
Yeah.
So I would say avoid that as well. And also, if if their books aren't open, or if there is, if they do come back when you do apply and they say, no at this time, leave it there. Because
Yeah.
we do remember. So if, for instance, you know 3 months later, for instance, we realize we've got some gaps and we reopen, or something like that, and that person then applies again, immediately you just have that image in your head of, look, no, this probably isn't going to work as a parent agent relationship straight
Yeah.
away. So yeah, I would say keep it simple, and if it's a no this time, then obviously try again next time. But kind of don't push it past, why is this? Because we do get a lot of that in terms of, um, just things like, why do you think my child's not good enough, and things like that, when they get a no. And it's a real shame, because that's not what any agent is saying. And if a parent kind of perceives it that way, then it is really sad, because that's not what an agent's obviously saying at any point. It's just that obviously we have a certain number of spaces available, and we've got lots more children going up for those spaces than we have.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, there will be, I mean, with the amount that we do get, it does work out. I think last time when we worked it out stat wise, I think it was like, I think it was about 8% that we ended up being able to take on in relation to the amount that applied. So
Yeah.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with your child. That's not what we're saying, but unfortunately, 92% of people, for whatever reason, we won't be able to take forward.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's actually pretty good odds in comparison to a lot of other applications in
yeah,
this industry. So I want to be like 10 years old again and go for that one rather than the stuff I'm getting put up
yeah,
for.
true.
But yeah, I'd love to go again. It's so many of the questions today, I think quite rightly, are based around the parent agent relationship a lot because of a lack of understanding through no one's fault of the industry. It's really interesting. And I
Mm,
think a lot of parents might be hugely supportive of their child and aware of their ability, but absolutely no idea where to start in terms of finding an agency to apply to, or
yeah,
just how to help their child develop that talent, as you say, not necessarily in that big, huge theatrical fashion. I mean, if they
yeah,
if they want to do panto every year, then all power to them. But in terms of more naturalistic acting and finding agencies, what advice would you give them?
I mean, I think there's loads of ways that a child, and again an adult, can practice at home in terms of I mean, even if you get a child that's, let's say a 10-year-old who decides, again, I've never done this before, I'd like to give it a go, where do I start? And I think as a parent that's tricky, because unless a parent obviously has done it maybe before with another child, or if they've done something within the industry themselves, they have absolutely no idea. um, I mean, first off, I would say that, I mean, I think the first thing that everyone tends to do is then think, okay, let's Google an agency. And possibly that's kind of the wrong way round of doing it, because obviously before you, I think, go down that road, you need to make sure that it is something that they do want to do. So, I mean, things like, obviously going back to, although like what we said about a lot of stage schools teaching kids theatrically, I think just like local drama clubs and things like that are great for just the overall, I think, getting a sense of if it's something that they may or may not want to do,
Yeah.
first of all. Um, and I think when if you are looking on Google for an agency, obviously straight off, do avoid, because we get so many calls, avoid any obviously sponsored listings or anything like that. That's the first thing I would say, because we do get so many calls of people that have made the mistake of kind of applying to agencies that aren't really agencies at all. They're normally kind of portfolio companies that ask you to go along and be assessed and have, portfolio shoots done and things like that. Um, and then they end up paying, well, not even hundreds, thousands of pounds for like some sort of training or photos and things
What?
like that. So yeah, I would definitely say, if a parent, if you don't know where to start and you're googling, child agencies or things like that, definitely avoid any kind of sponsored listings
Yeah.
is key. But yeah, I would say kind of local drama schools. I mean, there's definitely nothing wrong with them. It's just then, once they know that's what they want to do, maybe not having to go down the route of. I mean, again, Lambda is great, and I think for kids in terms of confidence and things like that, it can be really helpful. And from a theatrical point of view, it's really helpful. But it's just making sure, I think, that later down the line, the children and their parents understand that's not then going to be needed for different genres all the time. So I think once they know that, then that really helps. But there's definitely nothing wrong with kind of local drama clubs and things like that, because that will, as I say, give them an indication if it's something that they do want to do, for sure. um, but otherwise, obviously, a lot of the time it's you can there's ways you can practice at home. So for instance, go online, find, kids monologues or kids scripts, and just practice doing them at home, like as you would if you had a self-tape request come in, so your parents recording you doing it. And do you enjoy doing that? Do you enjoy learning lines? Do you enjoy performing in front of a camera and that kind of thing? So there's loads of ways to do that at home without necessarily having to sign up to clubs and classes straight off.
Yeah. And something you've mentioned to me before when we've spoken on the phone
Mm.
before is how you hire young actors on a contractual basis, on like a timed contractual basis of
Yeah.
sort of 12 months, which was something I had never heard of before. As you say,
No.
I'm not educated in the young actors sphere, so that was new to me. And what is the thinking behind that? And how do actors either get that re-signed or conversely don't?
So it's definitely not the way that all child agencies work, by all means. So it's not just like a standard thing across kids agencies that everyone generally tends to do that. But I think a lot of people do, and I think the reason that we mainly do is because obviously with a child, a lot goes on and a lot can happen. Within 12 months again, whereas with an adult, obviously once they're on your books and you know them, although obviously they do age, they're not growing in the same way that obviously a child is. um, and it's really tricky, because also what we tend to find is, what if you take on, let's say, a 5-year-old for whatever reason, their ability as a, let's say, a 7 or 8-year-old is going to change. and what was kind of cute and great for the industry at 5 may not then develop as they turn, 6, 7, 8, and more is starting to be required of them as they obviously grow.
Mm.
Um, so I think that, and then I think also, um, with kids, obviously a lot of them just decide it's, they don't want to do it anymore, or it's
Yeah,
not for them, and that kind of thing. So I think kind of playing it as, let's see how we go for the next 12 months and then let's assess it at the end is kind of how we prefer to do things. Again, it is really tricky, and it's harsh to say, but for us as well, because we are dealing with the parents, obviously if you are dealing with a parent that over the course of those 12 months are particularly difficult, then even if you've got a great child, it's really, really hard to have that
totally.
relationship if the parents obviously for whatever reason kind of pushing back. And I think for that reason as well, we like to kind of see how we go over that course. And I mean for various reasons as well. Like last year, obviously we had to let some kids go that under normal circumstances we probably wouldn't have, and we probably would have kept them. But things do change within the industry as well, obviously, from, well, not even from a year to the next, from one day to the next. But we have to obviously bear that in mind as well when we're looking at obviously contract renewals and things like that. And one more thing as well with kids is obviously, again, back to the parents, but because they are changing all the time, we have to make sure that their profiles are constantly up to date.
Mm.
So again, obviously, as an adult, you're very rarely going to change in height unless you've like me, you've had a child and you suddenly half an inch. They say, I think, for every child that you
Oh Lord.
yeah, because I think your spine bends, but yeah, very rarely you're going to change height. But obviously, as a child, you're constantly growing and you're constantly changing, and that's something that obviously a parent needs to keep on top of. And if somebody's obviously going to be joining us at the beginning and then just not keeping up to date with any like heights, for example, or anything for that matter, and we can't get hold of them, then again, at the end of those 12 months, it's probably a good idea to say, look, this probably isn't working and isn't going to work for the future, kind of thing. So that's why we like to do it that way.
Yeah, that's quite an investment in time and energy in terms of, as you say, the decision to get headshots or snapshots, the decision to
Yeah,
constantly have to update your spotlight profile of, maybe they don't play football anymore. Timmy doesn't like football
yeah,
anymore,
exactly.
or a show reel that was amazing a year ago, and then suddenly they hit puberty and they're 6'2" and their voice is broken. It's like, well, that
Yeah,
doesn't work anymore. That idea of spinning plates that adult actors really struggle to sometimes afford to change a show reel every 5 years, let alone every
yes,
year and a bit.
exactly.
So that's something that seems so obvious now you said it that I didn't consider.
Yeah,
Um,
it is a massive investment, I think, for any parent, and it's something that I think parents often obviously don't even think about in those early stages of a
of
putting
course.
their child. And obviously a lot of parents do have more than one child as well, and it can become a very
Yeah.
expensive hobby. So it's
Yeah.
definitely something to think about from the start.
I'd love to talk a bit about the casting process itself, and
Mhm.
what are the sort of common mistakes or pitfalls that young actors or their guardians make in the casting process? Because when writing up questions, I was thinking about, it might be quite difficult to get a high quality self tape or a you know really detailed and accurate script analysis when parents don't work in the industry, or they've got a self tape to do with their child after working a 9 to 5 job, and they come back and what are the mistakes or pitfalls or just areas that, of course, people might struggle with in the casting process?
So yeah, I think it's really tricky for again for parents that aren't involved in the industry at all and have no idea what they're doing. Often, we may use jargon without even knowing that we're using it, and the parent doesn't want to say anything because they might feel embarrassed, and they
Of
don't want to ask,
course.
well, sorry, what is a casting or what is a self tape? And those things have obviously along the way have always kind of arisen whereby we have like an info pack. So when we take on, say, a new child, we have an info pack for the parents, and one of the first pages is literally like a glossary of like
Brilliant.
words, because it is, for a parent, it is daunting, and a lot of the time, as I say, they don't feel comfortable asking, or they feel like they should know, and they're not going to. Um, so don't be afraid to ask, definitely not. But I think in terms of common mistakes. I mean, self-taping is obviously now it's obviously completely taken over, and that has really, really put the onus on obviously the parent, because they now don't need to just take their child along to a casting. They now obviously need to arrange a setup, do a recording, work out how to rename a file, work out how to send that file. So for them, it's suddenly a lot of it has kind of been passed over. Right, you need to be able to do this. So we have been really trying to do a lot of kind of Q&As and workshops and things like that with all the parents to help them out, because that's something that, you know, even now they're all just trying to still get their heads around, to be honest. So I think self-taping is one of the major kind of things to get right, and one of the most common things that when it is wrong, it's difficult, because obviously we know what the child's capable of, but obviously we can only submit that self-tape that parent has recorded. So
Yeah.
that is a tricky one. I think in a casting process, normally when they're in the room, I would say, again, going back to probably pushy parents, we've had casting directors in the past call us and say, we
Oh
really
God.
liked, this person, but as they left the room, the parent come rushing in and, started reeling all this stuff out about them, and we just
Gave me
don't know.
slipped me a cheeky John
Yeah,
Lewis voucher,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. But we've heard, so, it really does then
oh,
often, it can put the casting director off of that child, and it's a
just a
real
bit.
shame. Yeah. So again, just don't be a pushy parent, really. Obviously, just if
Mm.
you are going to a casting, take your child to the casting, leave the casting, and then kind of see what
Yeah.
happens. And again, don't stress about it too much. We hear all the time, or have parents call us and they'll say,
Yeah.
we've just left this casting and I've just asked him, what happened, and he forgot to tell them that he does this instead of this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, look, don't worry, that's not what's important right now. They've
Mm.
got that, they've seen their CV anyway, and that's why they're calling them in. So if he's forgot to say, that he plays football, it's not a huge issue,
Calm
So
down.
yeah.
Yeah. I
So just
imagine you also get
relax.
that type of thing as well, where it's literally been 8 hours after the casting. It's the evening of it. Have you heard anything yet? Have you
Yes.
heard anything yet?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, constant. And I mean, and again, but probably before that, you get the I've seen this casting, have they been submitted for it, is another one that obviously beforehand you get a lot of as well, which is really, really tricky, because if obviously they were right for the job, and obviously we're doing our jobs properly, then they have been submitted, but unfortunately not every casting that they go up for they're going to be asked to be seen for. And again, for parents that aren't in the industry, that's hard for them to kind of deal with, because they just can't work
Mm.
out why their child hasn't been called in for this role. For them, it's just like completely alien. Like, why? What, again, going back to it, like, what's wrong with them? That's their
Mm.
initial reaction. It's really hard to kind of take that away from a parent.
Mm. I mean, it's hard
Yeah.
for people like myself as well, when you get your subs list from your agent and it's like, great, now I get to read through all the lovely jobs that they tried to put me up for that no one wanted to see me for, and you learn to laugh that off, and just
Yeah.
you take it on the chin as an adult, but that must be really difficult. Why won't they see my child for that? Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally understand that, because of course, as a parent, 9 times out of 10, you think your child is the best thing on the planet, and
Yeah.
totally rightly so. But
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thing. I think we've spoken so much about the actor agent parent relationship that we
Mhm.
don't need to delve into that anymore. I think you've been pretty clear in regards to how that works, and
Yeah.
how it is when it's good and not so good. But I'd love to talk about staying on the casting process.
Mhm.
Are there any major differences between the casting process for young actors and adults? Because I hear a lot about, not necessarily at the moment, but big group castings for young actors, where they might be casting a new CBBC drama, and it's a group of like 8 kids, and they literally do bring in 8 kids to read a scene with them. Is that the case, or am I imagining that? Or
I feel like it's very similar to the adult environment. Obviously, it depends on completely on the job, but I think as a process as a whole, um, I think it typically does work in the same way. In that, obviously, depending on what the job is, a certain amount of people will be seen. for that role, regardless of whether it's, an adult role or child role. So I think it is pretty much done, in the same way, in all honesty, with that side of things.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'd love to talk about another difference. Really, is handling high pressure situations and
Mm,
nerves. And as
mm.
you say that, you can probably get an idea if it's something a child actor wants to get into, but until you're put in a pressurized environment, you often don't know how you're going to handle it.
No.
And for adult actors, it's an extremely nerve-wracking task for a lot of people. I mean, some people walk into a room and go, I never feel nerves, and yeah, good for you, whatever.
Yeah.
But most of us do, to a certain extent. What advice can you give young actors about dealing with nerves?
I think, to be honest, a lot of the time the children are a lot better than adults, because they, especially the younger ones, because they haven't even thought about what's going to happen, because they just don't know. So they kind of just go in and think, okay, yeah, I'm here. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Let's kind of see what happens. And obviously, that's, even as an adult, is often the best way to be. I
Yeah.
think obviously as an adult, you build it up in your head, and obviously you have all these misconceptions, or this happened on this job, or this happened on that job, and so you're thinking about it way too much. Whereas I think with a lot of the kids, it is actually easier, because they do just go in and kind of just deal with it and see what happens. And I think a lot of them are used to, as well, if they do go to their local clubs, or even if they do drama at school, they're used to that whole constantly being together, as a group. So I think it is actually easier. Obviously, you do get some children that do get really nervous, and again, it's kind of, I guess, the same as with an adult, in terms of just making sure that they kind of understand, like, what's going on and what it's all about, and it's not going to be this experience that maybe they might start building up in their head, kind of thing. But I think every job's different as well, so it is hard. But I think one of the things that I always say to parents is, and even this is the same for a casting, particularly with the little ones, don't try and kind of tell them too much about, like, this is what's going to happen, like, you're going to go in, like, this is what you need to do. Because often, like, for instance, with the castings, we'll have parents that will come out and they'll say, I've just we'll call them and say, they haven't been shortlisted, they haven't been penciled, they haven't been recalled, etc. And the parent will say, right, I'm going to have to go and tell them. They're going to burst into tears, they're going to cry. And this is like a 5-year-old that, to be honest, there was no need to even say to them, you're going to a casting and you're auditioning for this and you're doing that. There was no need to even kind of almost tell them that in
Yeah.
advance, because for a 5-year-old, it's just, okay, we're going to go and see this person, they're going to have a chat, they might ask you to do this. But I think that's kind of important. And I guess that really at any age is not kind of making them feel, right, okay, this is what you're going to do, you're going to do
Mm.
this and you're going to do that, and just kind of letting them kind of get on with it, really, I guess, because
Yeah.
kids are, I think, a lot more resilient.
Yeah, I think with my question there, I almost underestimated young actors, because you're quite right. That idea, that blissful, um, not naivety again. That's a negative term, but that lack of awareness of how big a deal something is, that they're
Yeah.
going to go in with like they're gliding on air
I mean,
almost.
yeah,
That
typically a lot of the time, obviously, even if they're in the room with big actors, half the time they don't know them anyway. So,
who are you?
it's no
Yeah,
relevance. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And obviously they don't know, okay, this job is for this channel and it's for this. That,
yeah.
to them, that means nothing.
Yeah.
So
I almost wish that I could have that type of mindset going in. And it is, as you say, that idea of going in to have a play is what all of basically the majority of first year of drama school is about.
yeah,
Like, apart from the whole, sort of breaking you down kind of thing, part of it is the idea of, finding that playfulness that a lot of secondary schooling tries to chop away at. That
yeah,
idea of, that being free. That's really interesting, that, as you say, younger actors will a lot of the time go in with that anyway. That must be so freeing. I'm very
yeah.
jealous. Staying on that note, are there any other things that adult actors can
Mm.
learn from young actors? And is there anything vice versa that younger actors could learn from adult actors?
I think, like what you just said, the ability to be free is probably, I would say, the key thing, that the adults could definitely learn from the kids more than anything else. I guess with the kids, what they could learn from the adults, which kind of I think they really do, and that's one of the things that we often kind of get fed back in terms of when a child does their first job, is kind of doing that first job and for the first time kind of looking up to an older actor and realizing maybe that is actually what they want to do, and having that kind of person to look up to and seeing how they are kind of professional, when they're on set and things like that as well, I think is really nice when a parent will say to us, um, they loved working with this person, and now they've kind of seen this person work, they really really feel like this is what they want to do, and that kind of thing. So I think just the overall, like, deciding that they maybe might want to do that when they're older and not just do it as a child
Yeah.
is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about, especially as you say, knowing whether it's something a child wants to do, and that does change in years, especially if, say, they start child acting when they're like 4 or
Yeah.
5. How can a young actor balance that actor's life with that of a regular child? Like, is it a case of when it's going really well and they're getting casting after casting and landing jobs and going away for filming, that they sort of have to roll with the punches and go all into the acting, or is it possible to find a balance? I know that that's a probably awfully phrased question, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to
Yeah. Yeah.
ask
No,
about.
no, I do. Yeah. I think, again, that it does come down to the child. An example being, obviously, if you've got a child that has been cast in a large role in a large production and they're not able to attend school for 6 months and therefore they've got a tutor, um, is that child the sort of child that's going to make sure they keep up with their studies because they want to show that they can do that, and also not get to a stage where if they don't do that they won't be able to continue performing? Or is that child one that's going to think, great, I'm in this production now and this is going to make me for life, I don't need to worry about doing my
Yeah.
studies? So I think a lot of that does come down to the child, and that's why it's really important that a parent's constantly kind of monitoring that. And if they feel like that isn't going the right way, then maybe, I mean, we've had times in the past where a parent has said, look, can we put them on hold for 3 months, or because maybe they're playing up at school, for instance, and they kind of don't feel like it's a good time for them to be doing anything that's extracurricular.
Mm.
So a lot of the time, yeah, I would say it comes down to the child. But in terms of kind of balance, obviously that really depends on how busy the child kind of ends up being. Obviously, if they're doing kind of the odd jobs here and there, it's normally not an issue. I think it's more so, again, at the moment with self-taping, we've seen, we're getting so many of our child actors that are literally getting self-tape requests in every single day for like 2 or 3 weeks in a row.
Oh, don't.
And
I'm gonna
it
go sick
No, I
with
know,
jealousy
sorry.
here.
Sorry.
Oh god, it's early in the morning, but the whiskey's tempting me now.
But
But no,
some of
no,
them, yeah,
good
some
for
of them
them.
have. Yeah, but it's great. But then at the same time, it can be really, really hardcore for a child to,
Oh
obviously,
yeah.
you're at school all day, they get home, their mum goes, right, you've got self-tape, here's your lines, you need to learn this, we've got to get it back by tomorrow.
Mm.
And they've got to do
And
their homework
yeah, because
and
on that note as well, as you say, like, sometimes I teach at a stage school, and a lot of the time there are a few actors there with agents, and when they get self tapes, I prep them for their self tapes, and
yeah,
sometimes you think, on my word, I would hate to try and learn this amount of lines
yeah,
in a couple of days.
yeah.
Like, you're giving a 11-year-old boy 8 pages of dialogue to learn.
Mm. Yeah, it's
What are you
really common at
playing
the
at?
moment.
Like, I
Yeah.
understand that there's this, we've spoken to casting directors on here before, and I understand that there's this, attitude of, well, someone's gonna learn them and someone's gonna get the job, and it's like, yeah, I totally get that, and sometimes, if they go the extra mile, they'll get the job because they've earned it, but sometimes it might be literally the perfect kid for the job, but they've
Yeah.
had an awful day at school. They've got bucket loads of homework that schools are so on getting them done, and I'm sure that's a
Mm.
difficult thing as well when, as you say, if a kid's being a bit difficult at school, it's even harder to get them out of an afternoon of lessons to go to a casting. How on
Yeah.
earth are they supposed to learn 8 pages of dialogue for a self-tape? That must be
Yeah.
madness.
Some of them, I mean, we've had well, instances recently when they literally are pages and pages
Oh,
long, and sometimes they are the next day. And then we've had again, we've had some recently where they've had like 3 or 4 over a weekend, and
Yeah.
they're all different. Obviously, they're all different tapes, they're all different scripts, and so then the parents like, right, I'm going to have to just do this bite size, and because they can't learn all 4 of them at the same time, like
Yeah.
it's impossible, and it is really tricky. And obviously, not only that, because these aren't professional actors, that this isn't their day job, they're also parents that often are working parents themselves.
Yeah.
The kids are at school, they've got more than one child, so it is really tricky to juggle. And I do think it's a thing that's like, when parents initially do think of the idea of maybe putting their child into an agency, a lot of the time there's so much more that you don't consider, and
Mm.
I completely appreciate that. Like, you just wouldn't. And even when we've had people, like when we have people that come to work with us for the first time, that's probably the most common thing that I ever get told is, I didn't believe, like, I can't believe all this goes on behind the scenes. Like, I never would have known that you do this, because there is
Mm.
just so much more to it, I think, than people realize. So it is tricky for parents for sure.
Totally. I'd love to quickly touch on a quote that I found on your website that's
Mm,
really lovely. It says that every child is a different kind of flower, and all together make this world a beautiful garden. Like, it's
mm.
such a gorgeous,
Yeah,
gorgeous quote. Can you tell me a bit about maybe where that came from, or a meaning behind it? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but
yeah. Well, yeah, I think when I think it's only probably been on the website about a year or so, but when we were kind of updating the website then, I think one of the things that we get asked a lot, which I always find a really strange question, if I'm honest, but when either our books are open or just when people are just kind of calling or emailing to kind of check out, is a lot of parents will say, do you take on children who are or with, so it might be, do you take on children of a certain race, do you take
mm,
on children with a certain disability? And I always found that a really weird question, because I would think, well, why would any agency say no? Like, what would be the reason why you wouldn't take
yeah,
on, a Chinese child, or you wouldn't take on a white child or a black child? Like, why would you even feel the need to ask that question? I just found it really odd. And the same way with disabilities, for example, we'll get a lot of parents that will ask us, oh, do you have a disability section? Um, for us, there is no section. Like,
no,
obviously, if your child wants to do it and you feel like your child wants to do it, please do apply and let us kind of be the judges at the end of the day. So I think when I found that quote, it kind of summed up for me in terms of kind of our inclusivity, I guess, in terms of
yeah,
we look at every child in the same light, and please don't ever feel like,
mm,
for whatever reason, why you wouldn't feel the need to apply to an agency for whatever reason. Because, as I say,
yeah,
I have always found that a weird question, but obviously for the parent asking that, they legitimately,
of
for whatever
course.
reason, have a thought process behind it. So
And I think that's a very poetic way to respond to a question that can open up a discussion that is very, is full of controversy
yeah,
and loud words
yeah,
from
yeah,
people that may not be of that certain race or might not have a certain disability or
yeah. I mean,
stuff like that.
it's sad to think that they're obviously asking that question because at some point that question either has actually crossed their mind, and they are
Mm,
genuinely like wondering, if we do take on a child of any particular race or disability, or that has someone ever said to them, oh no, they wouldn't be able to do that because they're in a wheelchair, or I don't
ah,
know how it's ever come about for them to feel the need to ask it. But yeah, that was kind of, I think, the meaning behind
mm.
that quote.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to ask you one more question
Hmm.
before I let you go and have your very busy day. Is that you often hear growing up in school, especially where I went to school, that atmosphere, as it were, and you hear it as an adult as well when you're an actor, is the importance of getting a quote unquote real job.
Mm,
About encouraging children these days to wholly focus on STEM subjects. That was the Can't remember the exact quote, but it was from a rather notable MP. And
mm,
we're seeing a declining participation in the arts from a young age. It's a real shame. But what would you say to a young actor who wants to give this crazy career a go, really wants to commit, has that passion for it, but feels for whatever reason, whether that's outside pressure or just looking at outside their window into the world, thinking, well, I can't do this?
I think I think it's like any job, regardless of what that job is. If that's something that you want to do, do it. By all means, give it a go. Don't ever feel held back in any way. I mean, of course, there's always it's always a good idea to have options, and it's probably with any job, it's never a great idea to try and put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's really important that I mean, with any kind of extracurricular, that it's not seen as, okay, if you don't succeed at these subjects, then you could potentially try and do this or this. And I think often that's kind of the way that it kind of used to be. And I don't necessarily think that's the way now. I think more so than ever during lockdown, the arts kind of proved itself, and why it's so
Definitely.
necessary, and everyone kind of is so desperate to get back to the theatre and that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of really proven its point. But I think with any job, I would say, if that's what you want to do, then by all means do it, and don't let anybody hold you back. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, then that's the same as you saying, you want to become a doctor or a lawyer. That's not always going to work out either, kind of thing. So I would just say, like, push on with it, and don't let anybody tell you can't do it, because why not? What's the reason why you can't do it? So it is, I think, again, really tricky when it comes to the parent side of things and the kid side of things as well, because obviously as a child, if you want to do something, you can only really do that if you've got kind of your parent behind you as well. So it is as well as important to have a parent that's helping their child achieve those goals,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying, oh no, I don't want you doing that, I'd much rather you do this, when in actual fact, if that's what they want to do, the more you're going to hold them back, the more they're going to want to do it anyway. So there's kind of no point even attempting to do that, to be honest, and trying to live your dreams through your child and say, no, I want you to be this, or I want you to be that. So yeah, I think having your parents' approval, but also their support is going to be key as well. So make sure you've got them on side.
Brilliant. I think that's a really lovely way to finish. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me today, Bonnie. It's
No
been
worries.
a real pleasure, and I wish you a very, very lovely day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our podcast.
We hope you enjoyed it and learned something.
We look forward to having you back in the room very